Of other agenda items that we want to quickly go through. But my plan is that when we come to that issue that really has filled the room, is 15 minutes for those from Latva and all the groups that have an opinion that isn't for 5 years, and then 15 minutes for those who want the 5 years and why you want the 5 years. After that initial discussion, staff will talk about the options as they see it for us policymakers to do. Jim Clark from the mayor's office is going to also talk about potential, and I'd like you to do that with staff presentation about potential other sources of money so that the cab driver isn't burdened with such a tremendous burden as greening the cabs, which is important to green the cabs, but also the well-being of the driver is important, that they're not being exploited and that everybody's working together on this. So these are issues that we're going to focus on when we have the discussion. But first it will be those who are against the 5 years, those who are for the 5 years, and then staff outlining it all for us. My colleagues then will all interact and we'll make some kind of a decision today. So I want to thank everybody for being here. And if we could just, and we also have my other colleague here, Dennis Zine, who also will be speaking as well. Pardon me? Items 4, 5, and 6. Okay, 4, 5, and 6. This is a motion of Zine. Krikorian is staff here, Maria. And that's request the city attorney and DOT and the Bureau of Street Services, Use Division, and any other relevant city departments prepare an enforcement plan to implement any future ordinance council may adopt to enact the ban of mobile billboards, etc. That's a mouthful. Did you want to say something about it before we vote on it? Because we do have this, hopefully, something that would move quickly. Yeah, please, go for it.
Okay, thank you. The items that are before you, 4, 5, and 6, deal with the mobile billboards. These aren't billboards that are in a moving conveyance. These are basically trailers that have advertising on them, and they've plagued the San Fernando Valley and other parts of the city. We initially posted no one-hitch trailer signs. The companies that own these, operate these, park them right under the signs of no one-hitch trailers. They accumulate a number of tickets and total disrespectful of the community and the laws. We've had hearings, Transportation Committee, Plum, Information Technology, General Services, and the full council. I authored a resolution that the full council approved to sponsor state legislation. State legislation was recently signed by the governor, Assembly Bill 2756, which takes effect January 1st. And this will allow local jurisdictions throughout California to establish bans on mobile billboards that park on streets and sidewalks. This bill that was signed by the governor takes effect New Year's Day. The city attorney is in the process of drafting an ordinance, since the state legislation permits jurisdictions to establish local ordinances, and we are working on that with the city attorney's office. We need to direct the street use and transportation departments to come back to this committee with a plan for enforcement, including the fines, impound fees, staffing plan, and a phone number for us to call to get quick action to have these removed from our streets. There needs to be tough sanctions on this, unlike what we have now, where a number of citations are issued for a trailer parked illegally. Those citations are not paid. The trailer then goes up for a lien sale, and the trailer is sold. The parking tickets are not paid for. We need to close the loopholes that currently exist. We need to permit the impounding of these trailers, and if the tickets are not paid, have those paid in addition to the lien action. And we will stop the merry-go-round action with these trailers that have plagued the San Fernando Valley and other parts of the city. And if I can just ask Mr. Chair and the audience, how many people have seen these trailers? If I can just see a show of hands, the trailers that park, that advertise all types of different activities. Can I see a show of hands in the audience? Okay, those of you who don't have your hands up, don't come to the San Fernando Valley. Thank you very much. But it's a major issue. It's a major complaint that we're receiving, and this will give us the authority. And what we plan on doing is a task force with reserve officers that we will take care of this matter promptly. On New Year's Day, we will eradicate this from the city. So we would ask that the city attorney work with us to have this ordinance in place So January 1st, it will be in place, midnight, New Year's Eve, January 1st, and enforcement can begin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Could we ask staff for one quick second to come up? I got a bunch of questions I want to read into the record that would be followed up when we go forward with this. In fact, the recommendation is to approve item 4 and item 5 to continue and request the city attorney and DOT to report back in 90 days, and item 6 is to receive and file. Those are the three recommendations I'm going to make. But for the record, and you don't have to answer it now, but I want you to have these questions since we have a packed house.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, the number 5, we can't wait 90 days. Since this is almost the end of, or mid-October, we need to have this in place by January 1st. So we need to shorten that time frame on number 5.
So how about 75 days or 70 or 60?
Well, I asked the city attorney how long it would be.
Well, in order to enforce on January 1st, this has to be passed by council by the end of November, so we have 30 days of it having it published.
Okay, so to continue it, the request 45 days, would that work?
That's sufficient.
Okay.
Could we handle that around here, folks? 45 days?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Our Department of Transportation is one of the outstanding organizations in the world. On the 1st of January, a team of the Department of Transportation is on contract to the wonderful Tournament of Roses for that parade. Mr. Zine, what if this is effective the 3rd, which is Monday? That way we don't engage with these teams on a holiday weekend. Monday the 3rd.
I understand, Mr. LeBlanc. I have a task force of reserve LAPD officers that will be engaged in this activity. We will really not impact the DOT personnel since they have other activities, but we're putting together a task force of reserve officers that are willing to do this and coordinate with the tow companies. We will not need the assistance of DOT for the first operation that takes place.
Oh, you want to do it and ruin these guys' New Year's and not have them go to the
Well,
parade?
these reserve officers are very dedicated, and they're
I got
more
the
than happy to do it.
dedication. I'm just thinking of the people may want to...
We'd like to do it January 1st.
All right. That
Thank you.
means... All right, very
With
good.
that in mind, we're talking about a 45-day continuance of item number 5, but questions for the record that I want answers back is, what are the parameters of AB 2756? What authority does it grant us, and what is it lacking in the enforcement of mobile advertising trailers? And we'll give you this piece of paper. Second is, who will be responsible for enforcement? 3, will the city be proactive in enforcement, or will it be complaintive driven? Is the implementing ordinance being prepared by the city? Will a fine penalty schedule be included in AB 2756 implementation ordinance? When will the draft ordinance be ready for council approval? 7, it is anticipated that a lawsuit will be filed against the new bill. Have any court challenges been made to AB 2756 yet? If so, do you believe a judge will issue an injunction that would prohibit the city from moving forward with an implementing ordinance? And last question, should the city continue the unhitched trailer parking violation program? So respond to that when you come back with the 45 days. Yeah, please, Mr. Koretz.
In addition, and I guess we don't need those questions answered right now either, but I would ask whether we've made sure that it doesn't in any way apply to other commercial parking, so we don't find that we have UPS vehicles or other vehicles being ticketed because...
Mr. Gray, it's only trailers.
Yeah. Oh, I know the intention. I'm just saying we want to make sure they take a look at the wording of what we do to make sure it doesn't apply beyond what we're actually getting at. What will be the actual enforcement mechanism? Maybe that you can briefly answer now.
Go ahead. I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry. Can you repeat your question, sir? It's difficult to hear.
What will the actual enforcement mechanism be?
What's the actual enforcement mechanism?
Well, depending upon how the ordinance is written, it could be as simple as once an initial citation is issued for the first offense, it could be impounded on the second, or if it's something that could be enforced upon the initial contact of the vehicle, or it's in violation of the ordinance as it's written, it would be impounded on site.
So we haven't really decided.
So it's all depending upon how the ordinance is actually written.
So the ordinance will have to follow state law. State law requires that we issue a warning citation to the first time, and then
Correct.
beyond that, we can start impounding. If we come back, that vehicle is still there, or if that owner continues to violate the law, from then on, we can impound. We don't have to keep citing a repeat offender.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and it is a big issue, I can tell you that, in the 11th District. We have a lot of them up on major streets. It's not only causing potential traffic problems, but it's also impacting some of the local businesses as well. So the sooner we move on it, the happier we'll be. Okay, so we have a motion
Well,
going
wait, hold on
forward.
just a second. Two questions. One, item 6, I'd like finance to make sure that that's done. I don't even want to receive and file it, but I think it makes sense to me. So, item 6, which is after 5.
It's a Laban Zion requesting that the city attorney, with the assistance of DOT and the Office of Finance, report on the feasibility of conditioning the receipt of a business license on a business applicant's certificate that it will not use mobile billboard advertising.
Yeah, I think at least have the city attorney look at that. If you could just ask them to look at it instead of receive and file. And also, are you going to be moving, just to Councilman, the fine councilman of the 3rd, are you going to be moving these trailers yourself on the 1st of January?
I'm helping coordinate a task force. for
As a
that.
councilman?
No, maybe as a reserve LAPD.
Well, the only reason I say that, Dennis, in all honesty, I think we should just rule, the city attorney should voice on that, because I don't know if you could make legislation to enforce it yourself. But you may want to look at that. He's a very good councilman, and he's a very good reserve officer. He was a so-so police
served
officer.
many roles, Mr. LeBon.
All right, Mr. Zion. I don't want you to get in trouble.
Okay, so
That's
bottom
press right
line
behind
is,
you, right in the store.
our colleagues, approve this motion number 4, continue item 5 for 45 days so we can move quickly by the 1st of the year. And item number 6, not only receive and file, but get the city attorneys to respond back to that motion.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Do I have support of my colleagues on that? It's unanimous. Thank you so much for items 4, 5, and 6.
Mr. Rosenbaum.
Items 1 and 2. We just
Rosenbaum.
quickly get rid of 1 and 2, and we can get to item 3, which is what you're all...
Item 4?
Please.
What was the action on item 4?
45 days.
No, item 4.
4, approve the motion, period.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Approve the motion, 5, 45 days, 6, make a legal issue as well. Thank you very much, colleagues, for that. Now, we have 2 other items. We have item number 1 and item number 2. Maria, do you want to quickly do item number 1?
Yeah, item number 1 is the CAO-CLA report, joint report relative to the funding for and accounting of the city charter bus program pursuant to a Parks-Rosendahl motion. You have the joint report before you. It provides a breakdown of the charter bus program. If you recall, in early July, right as the fiscal year began, you allocated $750,000 from the Prop A reserve to fund the charter bus program for the council offices and the mayor's office, and you directed our offices to report back on the status of the program. We have included in the report a summary table that shows how much money has been spent as of September 10th by each council office. There was also a request to look at overlap of entities that may have received funding for the charter bus program through the mayor's office and the council office. I can report that the mayor's office spent the bulk of their money up to this point on the Summer Nights Lights program, and there was no overlap with any nonprofits receiving that money, so it's a note and file report.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Parks, I know, put the motion in, but let me ask 3 quick questions, please. So approximately a third of the $750,000 allocated has been spent, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and the funds can be used through the end of the fiscal year or until they run out?
yes.
And 3, so that time frame may get us to budget deliberations, where can we look at whether or not we can sustain the program?
The only option in terms of what we've looked at for funding would be to go back to the reserve, the Prop A reserve fund,
I
which
see.
will make things more difficult in the coming years because we do have a projected deficit.
Okay. Mr. Parks, did you want to add anything to this since it was originally your motion?
No, I think the issue is that should be a receive and file, but I think it's important for the council's members to know what their expenditures are. We'd hope that the $40,000+ would get them through most of the fiscal year, if not all, and we'd ask each council office to do 50/50 programs or find ways in which they could stay within this budget, because the alternative of going to the reserve fund within Prop A only creates greater shortfalls in the future, and those shortfalls could eventually end up losing dash services and other bus services. So I think it's just information. We hope that every council office understands the limited number of dollars and stays within the particular budget of $750,000 for the mayor's office and 15 council offices.
Thank you, Mr. Parks.
Just wanted to make a comment. I absolutely, as all of us, support this here. If there is a money challenge, I would want to put on the table the issue of outside the city commuter express buses, and if there, I would rather keep charter service as opposed to lay off the charter service to preserve that more than commuter bus lines. So make that as a note. I think it's a friendly amendment that we think this is a great program, but yet that if we have to make a choice, they come back with us. Don't just cut it. Come back to us and let us make the decision.
Fair enough, and that's the right thing to do.
Fair enough.
Mr. Parks?
But one of the things, Maria, would you, on the original report that we approved for cuts in services, it may be important to redistribute that so every council office knows what we approved in the number of cuts on all levels of service before we talk about cutting additional.
Right.
Okay.
Very good.
Good. Do we have unanimous support, colleagues, on that?
Yes.
So moved. Thank you very much for that. Now, agenda item number 2. Staff, please come up real quickly for this, and I know that there are questions, but I'll just raise them for the record, but I don't want to hold up the people here in the audience much longer. Just real quickly, was the DOT report brought to the attention of the Bicycle Advisory Committee? First of all, Maria, read the motion.
Item number 2 is a CEO report relative to DOT's claiming of funds for the TDA Article 3 for allocations to bicycle and pedestrian facilities.
Is there a rush to get this done on this one?
This one? No. Okay, Mr. Parks has a ton of questions on this, so why don't we continue this item, if it's all right, colleagues, until our next Transportation Committee meeting. This is item number 2 regarding the $2.6 million for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. He's a series of questions. It's about $5 million altogether.
Do you want to lay it on the desk in case we can get to it, depending on how fast the other works?
Okay, so we'll continue this item, and maybe we will do it today after we finish the bigger issue. So hang loose for that, possibly to be heard today. If not, we'll continue it. Depends how long the rest of the meeting goes. Okay, is that all right, colleagues?
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to go to item number 3 that has really brought the room full and is the reason we're down here in the City Council chamber.
Item number 3 is a Cardenas-Gregorian motion instructing a report on the feasibility of extending for 5 years the contracts with the current taxi franchise operators with the requirement that 80% will be comprised of fuel-efficient vehicles.
Okay, many of you know in the audience that as doing our homework, many of us have met with various folks. I've met with Latva, I've met with drivers, I've met with other community people. We all have been doing that, and the point is so that we can make a decision today. As I had mentioned in the last meeting, my desire is for the committee to make a decision today so that whatever the story is, by the end of the year, we have a new law in place effective January 1, 2011. I've just been handed a whole lot of cards, and I have asked in meetings with the groups that we limit ourselves to 15 minutes on either side of the issue so that we can have staff come up and take us to where we are today, and then council members to ask any questions they want before we take a vote. They're against and for. So against, and Paul, is this the order that they were given to you by Latva? Okay. All right. There's 15 minutes. We're going to run a clock on this. And I'm going to quickly mention the names, and if you could kind of line up and see if you can get this all done in a 15-minute period. Okay, first there's, is that Andre Prin... I understand, fair enough. You'll get a chance for that. I appreciate that very much. How about Andrew, United Independent Taxi Driver? Where is he? Andreey. He's not part of it? Okay, gotcha. Okay, where is he? Where's this gentleman? Oh, great, terrific. Thank you very much for that. This is the United Independent Taxi Drivers Incorporated. Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilmen. My name is Andrei Primushka. I'm president of United Independent Taxi. I have to clarify a little bit. We against to this motion, we against to this condition, but we not support with, we not any contact with the Latva. I'm sorry. I'm here to set opposite 5 years extension this franchise with condition to greening, with condition to change the existing 80% of taxi cab fleet for the hybrids. On behalf of my members owners, I argue to Transportation Committee to complete a study begun a year ago with the next 2, 3, or 5 years. According to the staff recommendation, they need the time. They need 2, 3 years to study, to continue the study. They need some money. Let's give the chance to finish that moment, fund the money, and find the way to protect the individual owner member. We're not opposing to be green, to city to be green. We ask you to be protect individual owner member investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And that is a separate one because he is from a cab company with a different point of view. So now we have the list of folks here. Is there any particular order? Salazar?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're up first, and then Mike Garcia, you're second. I always apologize for this. Shimelis, M-I-C-A-E-L. Great, you're in line, great. Okay, and then we have A-L-T-A-Y-E. There he is. Okay, make sure you say your name when you get up to the mic. I'm pretty poor at this. Then we got Rick Tuttle. I can remember that name. Okay, then we got Betty Hung. Betty, are you in line there? Okay. All right, Adrian Martinez, I got that right? Or is it Andrew? There you go. Okay, and he's with the National Resource Defense Council. And then there's Stephanie Taylor of Green LA Coalition. Okay, you're all in line. We're going to start the clock right now. That's your 15 minutes of fame. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Cynthia, President of Los Angeles Taxi Workers Alliance. We don't oppose greening. But without the study already began, the money has been spent, that study has to be finished, and it has to be sustainable. This is not sustainable. The burden of buying cab lies on owner drivers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Honorable Transportation Committee. I'm here in support of the extension.
Your name again for the record.
Mike Garcia, President at CIU USWW. We stand in support of a 2-year extension along the lines of the letter from the Mayor, Antonio Verragosa. We think that's an appropriate amount of time to pursue both aims, both the green industry results we want to achieve, as well as reforming a corrupt, bankrupt labor system that it does not work for these hardworking cab drivers. We do not believe that one issue needs to trump the other. We can reform the system to create a green cleaning environment. At the same time, we can reform the system to create a fair labor environment for these taxi cab workers. LA has a proud history of reform, of fixing injustices. We're evidence of that, and we've obtained your support over the years with our Justice for Janitor Security and Airport campaigns. We call on you to do the same for these taxi cab drivers. The new news I have is SCIU International is now firmly behind this effort. You'll be all of you receiving a letter from Mary Kay Henry and Eliseo Medina, our national leaders on this matter. We need to fix this problem, not just the green cleaning picture, but also the picture for these cab drivers to create a fair work environment and fix this corrupt, abusive, exploitive system. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Sir, your name for the record.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Shimadlis Taddasa Mikhail. I am from United Independent Cab Company. I have been driving taxi for the last 14 years, and I am a LATWA member also. I am against this motion 100996, the 5 years extension, because it is a burden on the taxi drivers. It's unfair. It has been decided by some of the taxi management companies without consulting the drivers who are buying the cars. This management group, they don't buy the cars. We are the ones who have the burden to buy the cars, and we are the poorest strata of working people in the city, whereas in the management group, they themselves don't drive green cars. They are forcing us to drive green cars. And how many people drive green cars in the city? There are millions of cars in the city. Our effect in the environment is very little, but right now, with financial problem we cannot afford to buy these green cars. Please make it a medallion. That way we can afford to buy green cars. And I support the mayor's proposal, suggestion, the 2 years.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Yes, sir. Your name for the record.
My name is Alta Asfaw. I'm an owner driver for the Yellow Cab Company. I'm here against the motion, and I just want to ask two questions. I want to answer from the DOT and the management company. Who pays the green car? $35,000 and $40,000. They didn't tell you this. I want the answer right now. Who's paying for the green car? Who's buying? Please ask this question, and I need to get an answer to my driver.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Please, your name for the record.
Mr. Chairman, Rick Tuttle. It's good to see you and the members of the committee. In 2006, a UCLA survey found that the median earnings of leased drivers is $8.39 an hour, including tips, with owner drivers making about 20 cents more. These aren't kids driving these taxi cabs. The median driver's age is 47 years of age, father of school-aged children, works 72 hours a week. Most of these drivers, ladies and gentlemen, have no health insurance. I think we have a rolling sweatshop on our hands as a city public utility. So I am pleased to join the LA Taxi Workers Alliance, the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, and the environmental community in urging an 18-month period to complete our 2-year period, 18 months to 2-year period to complete a best practices study of this public utility and implementation and approach. Speaking on behalf of myself and my wife, Rebecca Rona Tuttle, who yielded her time to me today, when this implementation occurs, 3 things will happen. 1, the drivers will lead better lives. 2, the environmental community will be pleased and we'll have a more sustained environment with a carefully worked out plan. And finally, Los Angeles' new taxi industry policy will become a model for other cities, large and small, across the country. Once again, Los Angeles will be in the lead on doing the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Betty Hung on behalf of the LA Taxi Workers Alliance. For the past 2 years, LATWA has advocated for a 21st century green taxi public utility that would position the city of LA as the greenest taxi industry in the nation. From the beginning, we've pointed out, however, that it needs to be sustainable. and that the purchase of green taxis must be affordable for taxi workers. Yet the LA DOT's last-minute 5-year renewal proposal does not contain any financing or financial assistance options for drivers. The LA DOT's own consultant stated in a 2009 report that a used Toyota Prius would cost about $16,000 and a Toyota Camry hybrid about $18,000, in contrast to a used Crown Victoria, which costs about $4,000. The DOT consultant stated, quote, "The financial challenges are likely to be access to capital to finance a rapid transition," end quote. So without thoughtful planning for how taxi workers will be able to afford green taxis, the city will not be able to green the taxi fleet in a sustainable and effective manner. The mayor's support for a 2-year renewal combined with a study is a thoughtful and reasonable approach. Indeed, the city decided over 2 years ago in 2008 to conduct a study to identify best practices in order to transform the taxi public utility into one befitting this great city. The city should conduct a study as promised and focus on 2 primary areas. 1, the greening of the taxi public utility, and 2, promoting the workforce and economic development and an overall structure to improve the working conditions of taxi workers. Especially with the Mayor's 3010 initiative, there's a tremendous opportunity here to integrate the point-to-point transit capabilities of taxis into a multimodal public transportation system to get people out of their cars and to use public transit. This golden opportunity should not be lost. A 5-year renewal of the status quo, however, would squander this opportunity. A study and planning for implementation of a new system is doable within an 18-month time frame. We've passed out a handout that outlines a reasonable and realistic time frame for conducting the study and preparing for implementation. 2 years would actually provide another 6 months buffer. Moreover, a waiver or carve-out can be done for the 50 wheelchair-accessible vans that have been purchased per a federal grant. We, of course, support providing excellent service to people with disabilities and believe that this carve-out should address that problem as well, or that issue as well. We urge you to demonstrate leadership and support a 2-year renewal. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your comments.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Taylor, the Managing Director of the Green LA Coalition. I'm here with some of my members to stand here with me. Our message is very simple, but first let me introduce who's standing here. The Public Council, Coalition for Clean Air, the Los Angeles County Bike Coalition, and others that couldn't be here, the Sierra Club Angeles Chapter, the Urban Environmental Policy Institute, and the Bus Riders Union. We're here. Our message is very simple. Greening LA's taxi system is a top priority for Green LA. However, we oppose the 5-year extension because simply we can do better. And so Adrian Martinez from the NRDC is going to explain our position. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I'm here on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comment today. I will be speaking on behalf of the environmental groups that have weighed in on this matter. At the outset, I want to just clear up some myths that I think have been going around. First, the environmental community is obviously supportive of moving to cleaner vehicles. This is an important approach to reducing greenhouse gases, to reducing smog, and in many ways we think this is a critical fleet of vehicles to accomplish that. The other thing is, there is no desire to create chaos. I think every proposal out there figures out a way to allow the franchise to continue. It's just a matter of how long. There's no desire that there be chaos in the street come after the new year. The second thing I want to just reiterate is anybody who's claiming this is a green versus workers issue is wrong. These goals can be accomplished simultaneously. It's just right now we don't have a plan to do that. Right now, we have a plan to create a plan. And I think that is a fundamental mistake to move forward under that premise. Environmentalists want a detailed plan about how the greening will happen. The current proposal that we have seen, to be honest, is just not fully baked. We need additional time to develop a comprehensive plan. And this plan, usually environmentalists are urging decision makers to act quickly. For this plan, we think you can take a moment, reassess, and develop what is truly the greenest plan, a plan that is suitable for a first-class city like Los Angeles. currently there are a lot of proponents for the 5-year plan. The kind of plan that they're promoting is converting to 80% hybrid over 5 years. We learned today that it's actually less than 80%. It's about 73% of the vehicle. But the bigger issue is there are no details to this plan. There are no details about how this will happen, how certain types of drivers are going to afford it. And I think what's key moving forward is that we understand how lease drivers are going to afford it and how owner-operators are going to afford it. Because these owner-operators are small businesses, and we need to make sure that they can afford these newer vehicles. The other issue is we just have a fundamental concern over the amount of vehicles. We think the city can do better. And locking ourselves into a 5-year plan right now, for example, there are cars on the horizon that are compliant with the ADA that could be used and could meet very stringent air quality standards. Now, the proponents of the 5-year plan will likely present consultants that will claim that there are great benefits to turning over the fleet. That is undeniable. If you turn over to cleaner vehicles, there will be benefits. However, it's also undeniable that doing a very thoughtful, progressive, and well-thought-out program has undeniable benefits. You will ensure that at the end of 5 years, you will have a truly green fleet that is first class. So at the end of the day, what's happening is the debate is whether the environmentalists should support a yet-to-be-determined plan that isn't bad enough for greening. And what we think is the city should strive for a much stronger plan. We think the Los Angeles Department of Transportation has done some legwork up front and done a good job of gathering some information. We think there's still more work that needs to be done to fully flesh it out. So the environmentalists actually have a different proposal from the other advocates that came before. First, we think that the city should extend the franchise for 2 years. And then secondly, and concurrently, there should be a study that looks at 3 major issues. One is how can we make the Los Angeles taxi fleet the greenest in the nation? Not just settle for this is a pretty good greening proposal or isn't bad, but figure out how we can be the greenest. This is especially important as there's a tax on AB 32 and other efforts to clean up our environment. The second thing, thus we must take every opportunity. The second thing is make sure that there's a financing plan so that all drivers, including small business owner-operators, can afford this and are getting the right vehicles. And then the third is how can we use this program to push technology? We need to start thinking about how do we push even cleaner technology. This is an important fleet. It's a lot of vehicles. And so working with groups like the Air Quality Management District and other folks. However, the current timeline for this is wrong. Right now, what the proponents of the 5-year extension are saying is let's get a 5-year extension, and then we'll develop a green plan after that 5-year extension occurs. That's not the right path. The green plan needs to come before the city council should provide a 5-year extension. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we have the folks who believe in the 5 years speak, as a prerogative of my colleagues, both Cardenas and Krikorian are here, who are the makers of the motion that is part of the issue that we're going to discuss today. Did Mr. Cardenas or Mr. Krikorian want to add anything or say anything at this time? Going once, going twice? Please. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members. I spoke before this committee on this matter before. I would just like to once again thank you for all of your diligence and your attention to this matter. It is very important. Basically, what you have before you is an opportunity for us to move forward responsibly. And with all due respect, we have heard the mayor of Los Angeles iterate locally, nationally, internationally, that we want to be the greenest big city in the country, perhaps even the greenest big city in the world. So therefore, I'm a bit surprised at an October 12th dated letter where the mayor is artfully describing how moving forward with 2 years and therefore foregoing any real semblance of greening of the taxi fleet in the city of Los Angeles forgoing that for at least 2 years, I'm a bit baffled. So what I want to remind all of you today is we have various policy individuals and bodies in this city. We have a structure that allows for the mayor to have his input and his ideals and ideas as the chief administrator for the city of Los Angeles. But what is before us is a motion before the council, and the council has the authority and the responsibility of deciding whether or not we will, in fact, allow the franchises to expire on December 31st of this year and do nothing and allow them to go forward on a month-to-month basis. Happens quite a bit in this city, far too often than I care to be proud of. Or we can go ahead and say, let's give an extension of 1, or in this case, as the mayor supports, 2 years. A 2-year extension will, in fact, very likely thwart any greening of the fleet, taxi fleet in the city of Los Angeles, for one basic reason. You can't finance something on a 2-year deal. You can't finance a car, you can't finance a property, and I'm not saying that you can't 100%, but just the mechanisms out there of the industry that actually helps business finance, and I owned a business, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, it just doesn't happen. And the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons why 5 years is an appropriate amount of time, it's the kind of time that we could actually get a written, agreed commitment from the franchisees that they will in fact green, and if they don't, then they lose their franchise. So the fact of the matter is, there's a reason why 5 years, if we want to clean up the environment and we want to make sure that the carbon footprint of the taxi cab fleet in the second largest city in the country actually improves starting tomorrow, we need to move forward with something that is a mechanism that would allow the industry to actually do so. A 2-year extension is something that, although speaking of studies and kicking the can down the road, in my opinion, is something that there is perhaps a little bit of merit, but it forgoes the opportunity that we have before us to actually ink an agreement with the franchisees that actually allows the city of Los Angeles to actually realistically, honestly, and forthrightly become a greener city, specifically with our taxi cab fleet. So that's the main point that I wanted to make today. Let's not lose sight of the real opportunity we have here. The real opportunity as policymakers, I believe, is for us as a body, this committee, and eventually the body of the full council to deliberate and decide, do we really want to move forward now, or do we want to kick the can down the road for another couple of years?
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas. Mr. Krikorian.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be back with you again to speak about this very important policy, and I'm honored to be here with all of these hardworking drivers on all sides of this issue who are here to help us understand the policies that will have such an impact on them. This is I think, a pretty straightforward matter at this point. We seem to all agree that some extension of the existing franchises is necessary to avoid transportation chaos in this city. All sides seem to agree with that. The mayor seems to agree with that point. The question is, what kind of extension are we going to want to impose right now? Are we going to want to go with a 2-year extension, which, as Mr. Cardenas says, kicks the can down the road a bit? Or are we going to go with a 5-year extension, which allows us to get busy today in greening this taxi fleet? It allows us to make the investments today in the kind of taxi fleet which will reduce our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, will reduce other pollutants in the air that are causing our children to suffer from disproportionate rates of asthma and so on. We need to start that work today. And frankly, I'm disappointed to hear from some of my friends in the environmental community who've been so forceful in dealing with other policy issues that I have taken the lead on, in asserting that we need to start today because we don't have a single day to waste in addressing global warming. I'm a little disappointed to hear some of them now stand up and say, we can wait 2 years. You know what? We can't. We don't have 2 years to wait to start addressing the problem of global warming. So problem number one with a 2-year extension is for the next 2 years, there will be no investment, realistically, in greening this fleet. Problem number two, a 2-year extension will not allow the degree of certainty that will allow us to benefit from the federal grant funding of $2.5 million for vehicles that can accommodate our disabled citizens. Now, I happen to believe that every citizen of Los Angeles in every neighborhood of Los Angeles is entitled to fair and equitable transportation treatment. That means that someone who needs to pick up a cab in South Los Angeles ought to have the same ability to do so as someone who wants to pick up a cab in Brentwood or the Palisades. And without a 5-year extension, we will not have that opportunity afforded to all of our citizens. But more importantly than that, the disabled citizens of this city who need specialized vehicles and who we all know don't have nearly enough resources available to them, they deserve to have equitable treatment and transportation too. And we have $2.5 million federal dollars sitting on the table waiting to be taken. And in this time of budget shortages, we can't afford to lose 1 penny of that. And we will with a 2-year extension. We will not with a 5-year extension. So I urge you, for that reason too, to move forward with a 5-year extension. Now, there are those who've said, you know, let's slow this process down so that we can consider, you know, the working conditions that drivers have to operate under, and I am extremely sympathetic and understanding of that viewpoint. I think that we certainly, as we have, we ought to have a regulatory scheme in place that allows the city to continue to have a role in improving the lives of our drivers. And I don't need a UCLA study to tell me that driving a cab is a lousy job. I don't need a UCLA study to tell me that it's difficult to be a cab driver. I don't need that because my father was a cab driver. And I was raised hearing about cab driving, not by reading UCLA studies, but by hearing from the guy behind the driver's wheel tell me about what that experience was like. So I get a little resentful when I hear from some that, you know, this motion that Mr. Cardenas and I are bringing forward today is somehow intended to, you know, harm drivers. It's not. This city must continue to play a central role in improving the lot of drivers, whatever we do today. Of course we should. And of course we should help drivers in every way we can. But you know what? If we don't go forward with this 5-year plan today, we will lose all of those benefits of the environmental benefits, we will lose the federal funding benefits for the disabled, and we won't gain a thing in terms of our regulatory ability that will allow us to help drivers. So I urge you to move forward now. We're now about 75 days away from the end of the year. This is a deadline that we've known has been coming for a number of years now, and now is not the time to come up with new proposals for what we ought to do and figure it out with 2.5 months left in the year. Let's move forward. Let's do this 5-year extension. Let's do exactly what the city's staff has recommended that we do. Let's not go down the road of trying to do an RFA that the city staff has said that they cannot do. And let's face it, over the next 2 years, what's going to be different? Are we going to have a sudden infusion of funding that's going to allow us to have, you know, an RFA over those 2 years that we can't do now? I don't think so. 2 years from now, we're going to be in the same boat. So let's act. Let's move together. Let's act in favor of the environment. Let's act in favor of our disabled community. Let's move forward, be decisive, and get this job done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bruce, come on up. After? Okay. Now we have 15 minutes for those who believe in the 5-year strategy as proposed by Mr. Cardenas and Mr. Krikorian. If you could line up, I got a whole list here, and I don't know who wants to speak in what order. What's that name? Ryan Erickson. Diana Corvera. Ben Rockwell. William Littard. Thank you, William. Martin Caldwell? Is that Caldwell in line? Okay, great. Just get in line. Connie Gomez? Connie, are you in line? Okay. George Apobu from Bell Cab. Okay, get in the line there. Mark Bird, M-U-R-D, Mark from Bell Cab. Kevin Moore, and Kevin is from City Cab. Gerald Butler. Okay, Francis Nazarian. Francis Nazarian. Very good. Hiding behind the back, huh? Stephen, okay, Stephen, great. Matusoski. Aaron Kavak, great. He's in line. Michael Kalin, all right, Michael. Okay, and William Rouse. Okay, we got everybody lined up. We're going to start the button. 15 minutes. Let's get it all in, and let's move on. You're up first. Your name for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Erickson. I'm with Gladstein Anderson Associates. We're an environmental consulting firm in the Southern California area specializing in clean vehicle technology. And I actually did hand out a slide, I think, to some people. You can look along if you'd like. The plan that I was told about and that we did an analysis on is to replace 1,700 taxi cabs that are basically 6-year-old Ford Crown Victorias with green technology, either gasoline, hybrid, electric, or CNG. That's 340 taxi cabs that would be replaced each year with green technology. Turning to page 3, you'll see that there actually is an 8.6 tons of NOx reduction, which is over a 40% reduction in NOx over those 5 years versus if you don't do the plan. It's also a 32% reduction in greenhouse gases. Turning to page 4, additionally, there's 13 million gallons of petroleum that will be reduced with the green plan. And one of the things you'll notice here is that if you delay a year, that's a loss of 30% of the reductions that would otherwise be realized because of the compounding nature of it all. And finally, over the course of the 5 years, the owner-operators will save over $34 million in fuel costs because of the better fuel economy of these vehicles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members.
Hold on one second.
I'm sorry.
Hold the clock.
Can I ask the last speaker, I didn't hear who you said asked you to do the study. Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Who did you do the study in behalf of?
Yellow Cab.
Okay, so was it a city request or the cab franchise?
This is the cab company that requested it.
Pardon?
The cab company.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You're up, ma'am.
Okay, good afternoon, council members. My name is Diana Corriero. I am a county...
Turn the clock on, folks. Ring the clock. Okay.
I am a county supervisor for the Campus Business Services Department at Loyola Marymount University. We have an association with the cab companies for a little over a year now. The cab service has become a very viable option when they've been out for the students, when they've been out late and probably should not be driving. The drivers have become, if you will, surrogate parents in ensuring the safety of our students, which is very much appreciated by the parents. As you may well be aware, LMU is a very strong proponent of going and being green. We applaud the city's initiatives in the matter, but as in making changes, nothing happens or rarely happens overnight. By granting the taxi companies the 5-year extension, this will give them the time to get funding in place to begin this transformation with minimal disruption to the citizens and students that have come to rely on these services. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Committee members, my name is Ben Rockwell. As you can see, I have a disability. I also have breathing problems, and clean air vehicles are necessary for me. The $2.5 million that is available with a 5-year plan makes it so that I can breathe better and have accessible transportation, having the extra vehicles that will be able to be purchased with that $2.5 million. Please give us the 5 years.
Thank you. William?
Thank you for hearing my testimony very briefly.
Sure.
I'm disabled, and I use what is called a scooter, and the ramp cab system has permitted me to maintain an appointment schedule with my doctors, which ordinarily I would not have been able to do. So my current health has been greatly improved by the ramp cab system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Caldwell.
Good afternoon. I'm Marion Caldwell. I have been a consumer with Yellow Cab for 6 years. I fall into 2 rather vulnerable categories. I'm a senior citizen, I'm disabled, and I live in South Los Angeles. I have been very pleased with the efficiency. The cab drivers have been extremely courteous, and I support the extension.
Thank you. Staff, make sure when you come up you talk about a renewal. It's not an extension, and the difference between renewal and extension, just for the record when we do that. Connie?
Good afternoon, honorable council members. This is Connie Gomez, Abuelitos de Boyle Heights. We are here today because we support Yellow Cab. We need the service continuing now in our community, Boyle Heights, because we have a lot of disabled people on the street, cannot move for the hospital for different place. Please don't forget, it's important, our whole community. And thank you so much.
Thank you. George? George, use the other mic, I mean the main mic, okay? Yeah. No, yeah.
Councilman, the clock keeps running.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is George Opoku. And I'm a resident of the city of Los Angeles, and I've been a taxi driver for 25 years. I'm in support of 5 years taxi franchise renewal. If you don't approve a 5 years franchise renewal, the city of Los Angeles will lose $2.5 million. For this great city, they need this money to invest with it. We lose the federal grant. I have worked very hard, and I'm supposed to receive one of these vans, so I can serve the disabled people, which the Bell Cab has trained us how to serve these people. So please, what I'm saying, consider this when you please vote for a 5-year renewal. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, your name for the record.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Giorgio Dake, and I am a taxi driver, and I have been a taxi driver in Los Angeles for the last 8 years. Currently, I am with Bell Cab. I am also a registered voter of the city. I don't understand why, on the issue regarding my livelihood, we have to listen to people who have nothing to do with taxi cab business, which is my business. I don't understand how anyone can be against the greening of the taxis in the city. Other cities are doing. Other cities extend their taxi franchise for 5 years to get green taxis. Why LA should be behind when we, the real owner drivers, agree to do it? We pay for that. I am in support of 5 years taxi franchise renewal. It will give me time to get back the cost of a hybrid, and the savings on the gas will give me extra money to take home. Please consider this when you vote. Please vote for 5 years taxi franchise renewal. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Mark Burt, and I'm driving Bell Cab for 17 years. And for any business, what need business stability? 5 years give us very good stability to continue business and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, many families behind these decisions. Many families depend on this business.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Moore, and I'm with City Cab. I have 11 years' experience in the taxi cab operations. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the taxi drivers as being independent, and also along with being in favor of the 5-year renewal. I'm in hopes of that the drivers, along with the renewal, will bring a new attitude to the city by being more helpful to the public transportation, to the people that use the public transportation, and our guests that come to the city also. So along with that, if we can bring in new vehicles within the 5 years and a new attitude as far as the independent contractors, I'm grateful of that. I want to thank you.
Thank you for that.
Good afternoon. My name is Frances Nazarian. I've been a cab driver with Yellow Cab for 10 years, and I work the South Central area, so I know what it is like to work there, and the people down there really need those ramp vans. They don't need to be transported any other way. They need their dignity. They like to be transported in the wheelchair-accessible vans. We don't have enough of them. And again, that $2.5 million is just sitting there. So we need the 5-year extension so we can get those vans. Thank you.
Hi, dear members. My name is Steven Matusoski. And I started driving cab when I was 20 years old. Now I'm 37. I've been considering myself maybe the youngest dinosaur of this business. Why is that? Because my heart is attached to this job. I love this job. Number one, what I like about this job is the freedom and flexibility. When I was young, I was renting cab. I could make enough money to help my parents, to save some money on the side that I could buy my own cab. And of course, I was young. I like to party, have good time with my friends. And over the years, I got married, my life perspective changed, now I have family, kids, and this job allows me to support, to keep my strong financial stability in terms of to pay my mortgages, my own medical insurance, and many more. I've been happy these 17 years, and inviting you guys make final decision and let me be happy for another 5 years. Thank you.
Mr. Kovac.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and council members. My name is Aydın Kavak, and I drive a yellow cab. I'm an owner and driver, and I drive a wheelchair-accessible van. So I know what these people behind me are saying to you. I want to put a personal face to a driver. I'm not only a taxi driver, I'm a father, I'm a husband to my wife, and I am also an ambassador to this great Los Angeles city, because I am the first person when a visitor comes into this city that spends some considerable time. I am the first person, and I take them back on their way back to their home. I am supporting the 5-year renewal because I don't need to have that worry in my head, what is going to happen within the next year, what am I going to face in 2 years. I need to have that 5 years comfort in my head so I can be a better ambassador to the city. And before I leave, I just want to make sure that everybody that's in favor of this 5-year renewal, please stand up. Thank you.
We have Michael Collins and then Bill Rouse.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Michael Kalin, General Manager of Bell Cab. The city is busy. There is a big convention in town. Yet, all these people that stood up a minute ago are cab drivers, most of which are cab drivers owners. They're here, instead of being out there making money, in support of the 5 years with clean vehicles, green vehicles, hybrids. If they were opposed to it or had concerns about the payment, they wouldn't be here in front of you, packing this room, trying to express. This is not an issue about management versus Latva. And talking about management in 10 seconds or less, all managers, presidents, whatever, that are in this room are ex-cab drivers, including myself. We know what it's about. As it was said earlier by Councilman Krikorian, it's not an easy job. We all know that. Thank you.
This isn't built for somebody of my height. Good afternoon, members of the committee, honorable members of the committee. I'm William Rouse, the general manager of United Checker Cab and Yellow Cab. Council members, in front of you is the question of who to believe. On the one side, you have thousands of taxi cab drivers who develop their own business under today's structure. You have hundreds of cab owners who have invested their life savings into each of these taxi cab organizations, instilling us with their confidence. You have taxi cab managers with decades of experience in improving the business and raising the revenue for the drivers. You have democratic taxi cab organizations that have been providing service to this city for decades. You have the passengers, some of whom are disabled, who need for this taxi cab industry to continue to do its excellent work. You have a staff, a city staff, that with decades of experience, whose expertise in this area is top-notch, perhaps the best in the country. And on the other side, you have a group of people with no experience in the taxi cab industry, a group of outsiders, a group who relies on a UCLA study that has been completely discredited, makes no attempt to hide its bias, and finds its basis in slander and innuendo rather than fact. This organization's agenda threatens to turn an industry that supports the lives of thousands of families into chaos. Your decision today should be in the best interest of the taxi riding public and in the drivers, not in the dangerous agenda that is being advanced by this group of outsiders. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have from the South Coast Air Quality Management District, Dean, what's your last name?
My name is Hamatiju. We tried to submit my name here.
You're not Dean Santo?
Excuse me.
No, did you fill out a card?
Yes, I'm sure that one of my colleagues submitted their names. I'm from the Beverly Hills Cab Company, and I wanted to express my opinion as a driver who's been with this business for over decades. And on behalf of my colleagues, I just thought that it's good for you guys to hear my opinion and some of theirs also. I am here to express my opinion about the 5-year extension would be very essential, would be important for us to relieve and lift a big heavy weight from our shoulder and let us continue in this hard job. But on the other half of the subject, that the green cars is becoming a big issue. To begin with, 2,300 cabs of a city. I don't know how much of impact this green cab is going to make. But however, a lot of us, we don't have health insurance, we have a lot of financial trouble, and we are struggling in this economy these days. Financing a car, you know that $20,000, $30,000 to finance it is going to be a heavy burden on our
I appreciate it. I appreciate what you said. We've had 15 for, 15 against, this and that. Are you for or against the 5 years?
I am for 5.
Okay, you're for it. Thank you. That's good enough. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Dean Saito. I'm with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. While the district does not have a position on whether the 2 or 5 years, it does have a position that it supports that taxi cabs be 100% alternative fuel and hybrid, and would recommend that the proposal be amended to reflect 100% rather than 80%. We believe that taxi cab be as green as possible in considering the number of miles put on taxi cabs, and we believe that a study can be conducted in parallel of this action. That concludes my comment.
Thank you very much for that. And I would like staff to come up, but when they come up, I would also like to have Larry Frank from the mayor's office. The mayor sent a letter. Those of you who haven't seen the letter, I received it this morning. It basically outlines the mayor's position. Larry Frank, come on up for that. And at the same time, could we have the chair of the Taxi Cab Commission? And those two speak, and then staff will go over the reports and where they're at. We'll start with the mayor's deputy, Larry Frank.
Council members, Larry Frank, Deputy Mayor, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. The letter says that while we understand there are reasons for 5 years and 2 years that are both legitimate, the mayor's position is he thinks the better approach in this moment is to do a 2-year renewal, and the reasons are as follows. I guess the difficulty of the decision that you're being asked to make is twice as hard from my point of view because we don't know what standard is going to be asked of the drivers. And until we know what that standard is it, staying with the current standard, which we haven't increased for the last 10 years for no good reason, I guess, the ULEV standard? Is it going to be a SULEV standard? Is it a, PLEV standard? Is it going to be required hybrids, an ATP-ZEV standard? What is the standard going to be? Until we know what the standard is, we don't know what the cost is that we're expecting these drivers to bear as we green our fleet. Right, so the thing I guess I would ask us to really think deeply about is that we have 2,300 small businesses in Los Angeles. Owner-operators are small businesses. We're about to ask them, to basically invest, we don't know how much, in a clean fuel vehicle. From DOT, they talk about hybrids being available for $8,000. I did my best to buy a hybrid last year, and I couldn't see anything for less than $18,000 for anything with 40 to 50,000 miles on it. So it is a lot to ask of a small business. We are in the middle of the Great Recession. I think people in this audience don't even understand that what they're asking for is to add a $20,000 to $30,000 bill to their family expense. Are they embracing this additional cost? We don't know what the standard is that we're asking these small businesses to bear. And so what we're asking us to do the due diligence. I know we're in a very politicized environment. I know this is a very difficult environment for all of us to be in here. But we're saying if we take the time to look at other cities that are doing this. We're not the first city that's tried to figure out how to do this. Let's take the time to do a very simple scope of work, to reduce the scope of work. Let's look at how other cities are addressing this issue, right, as to how it is they're attempting to green their fleets. Let's find out if there are ways in which we can. So 2 years from now, we will know if we have some federal grants to help them out. We could put together the kind of supports that allow them to have the credit worthiness to purchase these vehicles. Right now, we don't have any of those programs in place for these small businesses. We have an obligation in my mind, even though it's a very, charged environment, to be thoughtful, to take the time to think through this. In the meantime, we can make some headway. So at the airport, we have an RFP that's about to issue where we can actually do an incentive-based approach rather than a stick. Let's use the carrot in the next 2 years. Let's figure out how to give maybe an extra trip if somebody's willing to green their car, an extra trip at the airport. So we can use an incentive approach as opposed to a stick approach to say you're not going to get your seal, you're going to go out of business if you can't afford to green your car. Right? We just don't have the kind of environment for small businesses, in my mind, to take on this extra burden until we know what the burden is. Let's find out, let's take the time, let's propose a standard. Let's go through that process. Let's see what the impact of this is before we rush down the road towards a thing that we don't, quite honestly, we don't know what the real impact is going to be. In terms of the actual, doing the study itself, we have the $126,000 left over from the DOT study. We have $100,000 that's been already committed from the Workforce Investment Board that could help us on this piece of work in terms of best practicing it and just looking at what other cities have done to do this work, so we're not going in blind, right? There's money also at DOT in their mobile source monies. There's actual expertise there, but if they're not willing to do it, we actually have a department that is willing to do it in the Community Development Department. So we could figure this out just to best practice it. Nobody is saying this is anything about, anything other than how do we do this, how do we do it right, how do we not impose these significant burdens on these 2,300 small businesses without understanding what it's going to do to them individually, personally. That's the position of the mayor's office, and I appreciate you taking the time to let me present.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Chairman and members, my name is Bruce Iwasaki. I'm the chair of the Taxi Commission. I'm simply a humble volunteer member of the commission, and whatever this council does, the commission will do its best to seek to implement. There are reasonable positions on all sides here and strongly held positions on all sides. There are a few points I think that have been lost in the discussion, though. Very important for the commission is that a study be undertaken to identify and be able to implement best practices that are known throughout the world and certainly the nation in order to increase transparency, to improve driver welfare, and overall to serve the public. That study should be undertaken. My position is simply this: the city can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can do some things immediately in the short term to improve the quality of life for drivers, improve public service, implement ways to integrate the taxi system with the overall transportation system. The choice here is not between to green the cabs or not green the cabs. That's simply not the choice before this council. So I urge the committee to take the position that will allow the city to move quickly to implement a study to let the full council know what its options are for the future.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Before staff responds, and I'd like you to respond to the mayor and what he said in his letter and your feelings about that, and also to the chair of the commission. But I'd like to ask Jim Clark to come up for a quick second and explain what his role is in all of this. Jim Clark is in charge of this whole business of federal funding for various things that we've been fighting hard to get in the last year and a half. Jim, there's two issues that have been arisen. One is the $2.5 million that has been set aside for taxis to continue to be purchased for people with disabilities. Is that $2.5 million tied to a 5-year renewal?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm Jim Clark, Director of Federal Relations in the Mayor's Office. I had a conversation today with Gil Williams, who is the project manager in Washington, D.C. for the Federal Transit Administration and the project manager over what this is called the New Freedom Grants. And I asked the specific question about that. There is no requirement that the FTA has as going through the documentation that I see. The grant money is available for it's provided every year on a competitive basis. MTA is the group that gets an a formula amount of money, and then they can make this money available on a competitive basis to groups that apply for it. It has to be spent within a 1 year, and then they have at least 2 years after that to spend that. So it's available for a 3-year period of time. But there's nothing, but it does indicate in some of the guidelines that the subrecipient, which in this case would be the MTA, could place some restrictions on the issue of how long you have to be able to keep records or that. It just says in the language here that if I can actually read from the guidelines, it says, when capital equipment or facilities are acquired, built, or improved, provisions must be made to assure satisfactory continuing control of that capital equipment and facilities. But it doesn't give a specific guideline. So it may be an MTA requirement, but not necessarily a federal
Okay,
FTA
second question for you is, one of the issues that has been raised is the cost of the greening and the burden it might have on the drivers. Are there federal funds, and I know Mr. Parks is instrumental in you being here, that we could look at for greening of the cabs, that we could lend to the drivers or work out some kind of a system that takes the burden off of them directly but ties it within the whole greening of America that we keep talking about, and green jobs.
Yes, sir. There are programs at the federal level, some at the state level, and even some at South Coast Air Quality Management District that has available. But the main one is a Department of Energy program called Clean Cities Petroleum Reduction Technologies for the Transportation Sector, or otherwise just Clean Cities. This is an annual funding program that's available. There's two areas that could be applicable to us. One of those areas has to do with refueling or recharging stations and building the infrastructure for that. The other has to do with actually helping subsidize the purchase of green taxis. And how that works in the latter case, it requires a 50% match. It is available for either new purchases of equipment, or it can be used for used vehicles that you're either retrofitting to make them so that they're hybrid vehicles or whatever. So it's available both for new and for used vehicles. And it requires a 50% match, but if the vehicle that you're using or turning in is less than 5 years old, you can count the fair market value of that vehicle as your contribution to a local match. So it's a significant amount of money. Say a hybrid that might be a new one at $16,000, that would be a used one. The requirement would be $8,000, but if you're trading in a vehicle that might be worth $4,000 or something like that, the cost to the person is really only $3,000 or $4,000.
It sounds pretty exciting and attractive. Is this for real? Can you look at it in the context of a 5-year renewal or not?
Yeah, well, every year the money is available. It comes out in a notice toward the end of the year. We've talked with the folks at SCAG. SCAG is the administrator for it. You have to partner with a Clean City Coalition member, of which SCAG is one of those. So they partner, and the partnership, it's available to private companies or to the city. The city could put together a coalition of taxi cab companies and make an application on behalf of a number of them in conjunction with them. So it's very flexible that way, and we could, I think the fact that we have the city and our particular clout, the fact that you're looking at implementing a program that does for the greening of taxis, and the fact that we have a significant congressional delegation here in Los Angeles, that I think we could do a lot to ensure that we would that our applications would be highly regarded.
Well, it's a little bit of a pig in a poke because we don't have it in the hand. But when United Cab talked about they couldn't afford it, would they be eligible for this?
Yes.
And when would you know more about this, and how would we be able to work it in our plan?
Well, as I said, the notice of funding availability usually comes out by the end of the calendar year, and then the awards are made in the spring, March, or April of every year. Mm-hmm. And they're generally talking about awards in the $100,000 to $200,000 category for vehicle replacement. And if you're talking about recharging or refueling, and this is one thing I talked with SCAG yesterday about, they have a proposal that they're doing with Edison to do electrical recharging stations throughout the county, but there's a big hole in that, in the fact that Edison doesn't serve the city of Los Angeles. So they would be very excited if DWP would like to work with Edison and doing recharging stations. So if that was part of what we were doing, that could be a program that we could get some significant funding for to make it easier for cab companies to have recharging stations.
Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Parks right now, since he's the one who requested, if he has any follow-up questions, and obviously all my colleagues at this moment who would want to talk to either of you, the mayor's office, or you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Parks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Jim, I think you hit on exactly what we've asked you to do in AURA. In fact, we've asked you so much that we've at every meeting. But I think it is important as we move forward that we give those cab drivers who believe they're in a financial strain an ability to see that there are alternatives. And if the material that we received here today as to the amount of emissions and the carbon footprint that would be eliminated and the amount of money, in fact, I was reading a letter that was sent by the major city mayors, and they're talking about this whole issue of greening cabs, and they estimate that somewhere in the neighborhood of $4,500 a year would be reduced per cab owner as it relates to their fuel costs if we went into this direction. And so I appreciate you doing that research. I think there is a lot of flexibility where we could be with SCAG on the station issue, but we also, as we move forward, could put together a program where the city embraces the franchises and go together and to apply for the other portion of the grant that then allows for that kind of conversion. And I think the benefit of it is that you have the situation to where the city of LA gets, and I understand the issue of the 20% that are large vehicles and handle disabled, but the other 1,700 vehicles, you would end up with those vehicles being converted, and you'd end up with it being of no cost to the city. And the cost of the conversion appears that it could be paid for with a program plus what you save in gasoline or petroleum. And so it would be of minimal cost to actually the operator. And so I appreciate the information, and I appreciate you got in touch with SCAG, because they clearly will be a player in this. And if we can find, not only with DWP, but the city and SCAG and our congressional leadership, it appears that we've come up with another alternative to move forward on this issue.
Please,
I
Deputy
was
Mayor.
just going to say that, I think everybody thinks we need to move forward. The question is, would it be useful to know what resources we have to allow people to purchase? I think you're right that gasoline, fuel efficiency will allow people to make the payments on a new vehicle or a used vehicle. It's the issue of credit worthiness to be able to purchase the new vehicles, who's in, who's out, who's going to survive this transition. And so I think it would be useful to be able to do the application, even if it takes us 6 months to, renew for 6 months, to find out what position we're really going to be in as we impose the new rules, the new requirements on the drivers. That would be...
I agree that if we analyze this to the nth degree, it would be 2015. I think the issue is that we have to realize that this place would be in chaos if we had no franchises as of December 31st.
Nobody's arguing that. The question is how long to renew them for.
Well, the thing is, but again, please, we know you're out there. Just let us conduct business. But the issue is, yes, that is the key issue. But I think what is also the key issue is not only the length of time, but what do you give up in shortening the time? And do you have 2 or 3 years, because we know nothing is done on time? Do you have 2 to 3 years moving forward without greening of any type, unless those who just voluntarily decide to do it? You have greening of very minimal, and then you move forward 2 to 3 years with no activity at all in a city that could benefit from almost anything you do to cut emissions. And so that's, I think, the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. And Mr. Koretz. These are just to the 2 folks from the mayor's world, and the other 3 will come in and reflect and talk to.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, and I'm still honestly wrestling with this in my own head. A few things that weren't entirely clear. The one thing we clearly seem to lose if we don't go forward with the 5-year plan is the grant for the disabled vehicles. Now, are we certain that if we took the mayor's approach and just delayed for 2 years, that we would not be able to implement that grant? Or would we be able to, if we gave a 5-year renewal after the 2 years, is there still a way to make that work? Because that certainly would weigh heavily upon our financially conscious city if we were giving away $2.5 million that we had in hand.
So DOT staff may have a difference of opinion from the mayor's office on, when I look at this, I've had to actually work with ARA dollars on a number of fronts, and we've actually had requirements to be able to keep certain investments in place for 5 years, and we've always been able to deal with the department to work out an understanding of how to be able to operate, for example, our truck driver training program down at the Jordan Downs adjacent on site. That's actually not going to last for, it's about 2 years. It's going to be on site. We're making site improvements, but we've been able to figure out how to do that work. I think it's not that difficult to most drivers. You basically, the grant goes to the city, and then it goes, as I understand it, to the franchises, right? So it's, what has to happen is that the city has to maintain some kind of ownership interest, so that if it's taken out of service before the 5 years is completed, when they do the evaluation of the benefit, it has to somehow come back to the city. But my sense is that any driver that's going to have is going to have the actual van is probably going to remain as a driver over the next 5 years. And the question is, will the franchises remain? And my sense is they probably will, right? They were all talking about doing an extension for 2 years versus 5 years. At the end of that 2 years, it could be easily extended. The issue is, though, are they going to be drivers? Will that van be in service? And so there needs to be some reversion of that if they're taking it out of service. But that should be the case anyways. The city needs to make sure that any van from going to any individual driver, it can't take it out of service, right? So there should be some ways in which to be able to control that it stays in service or it comes back to the city.
I would add to that in the federal requirements, there is a way to address, even if it's something is taken out of service, it can be still used for other FTA purposes, or it can be provided to a local government for its own public purposes for using it. So it's there is that ability and flexibility within the grant program.
Then, and I guess I'll ask the same question of the DOT folks when it's their turn. The next question for me is whether or not we really can afford to wait for the 2 years in terms of the greening. I know I've asked and I haven't been able to get a number in terms of the impact on overall pollution, but we did have a study, and even though the study was done at the behest of the industry, the consultants I would view as eminently reliable. And so I take that as positively as a study that we had done ourselves. And they say it would take millions of gallons of pollution out of the air. I believe that. So that's certainly a factor. But there are a couple of questions. One is in terms of the grants that we could get for greening, because that's the biggest question that I think is completely outstanding and unclear. Obviously, people that have current contracts, they want to renew them. So your first priority is to say, yes, I get 5 more years. A lot of folks will say, I'll worry about how to pay for the car afterwards. It doesn't mean they actually have really thought it through and they know how to get these vehicles purchased. And some are thinking it through more and saying, yeah, I know I can't really afford to do it without help. So how do we know we actually get this help? And when you talked about charging stations being a possibility, how does that play with hybrids? Or would we need to be talking about the next generation of plug-in hybrids before that really is helpful?
Well, let me speak to your first point first, which is that there's an obvious benefit to the environment. So I think what's most relevant here, yes, I think in a city that has about 30,000 hybrids, adding 2,000 more hybrids would be a benefit. I think the question is scale, right? And so that scale is something you have to understand and look at closely. We heard about specific numbers, but what does that mean in terms of scale? I think what's most relevant is that the 5 major environmental organizations in Los Angeles, when I talk to them, they say, hey, people think that they say hybrid and we're going to jump up and down as if that's really what our goal is. There's kind of a lost opportunity here that the city is kind of walking away from, to look at how it is that we not just add some hybrids to this mix, but how do we connect up and make a point-to-point transit system? How do we kind of go to MTA? And these are things we could and should do anyways. How do we go to MTA? All of the fixed rail stops in Los Angeles, don't have carve-outs for taxis. We should be doing that. We should be making our taxi system connect up to our rail system. We should be worrying about the fact that in LA, unlike everywhere else, the cars are empty more than half of the time. We should be worrying about those. Those are the real green opportunities inside of this, and adding some hybrids to the mix in an environment where we don't know if it's sustainable is not exactly why. That's the reason, as I understand it from talking to the environmental organizations, that they're here saying that they actually think we need to put some more thought into this and not just go down and sort of do a greenwashing strategy on giving the franchises for 5 years. Right? I think it makes some sense for us to take the time. So the second question is, what are the possibilities of what you could bring to the conversation? I think DOT has done some decent work to figure out how you increase standards. I think, the Janine and company have done a good job to figure out that standards could increase on a regular basis to different levels of standards of emissions. So we could take advantage of some of the new technologies out there. The big question is, what standards will the Taxi Cab Commission impose? And that, unfortunately, comes back on the mayor's office, and it puts us in a real difficult position where we're being asked, and the Taxi Cab Commission is being asked to have these really high standards, and we don't know what that's going to mean for how many people that's going to put out of business that are currently drivers if we add the additional, even higher standards to the mix. So I think it can be done. I think teeth can be put into the mix. I think the question is, do we want to understand what the impact of that is going to be before we do it?
Okay, thank you very much for that. Please.
Could I add to on question number 2? I just mentioned the recharging stations as a specific project that SCAG was looking at, but the grant opportunity is available for recharging stations, refueling stations, even E85 fueling stations, so biodiesel, that kind of thing. So it's broader than just recharging.
Okay, fine. He's going to leave it at that at the moment. Let me ask Parks.
Jim, would the stations or the franchise location for the cab, would they be eligible to apply for these recharging stations?
Yes, they can. The problem is, again, it's usually requires a 50% match. The grant opportunities are somewhere in the neighborhood of around $500,000 that they provide for those. So it would be better to do something,
with government
in a coalition to spread it around. And I just want to leave you with this point too on the grant opportunities. The fact that individual cab companies and that can apply for these clean cities, but the fact that we could do something with the clout of the city and the city's imprimatur on it and use our congressional delegation, I think is a real plus that would be of advantage to these companies that over and above what they could do themselves.
Okay, I appreciate that. And now, did you want to say anything, Mr. Alarcon, to either Mr. Larry, Frank or Jim Clark?
Well,
before we go into the report,
you say you don't want to be put in a tough situation, but we're already in a tough situation, and we're in a tough situation because the study did not occur. And had the study occurred, we wouldn't have half the consternation that we're having over this issue. Having said that, frankly, I don't like either option, and it's very difficult because number one, we don't know what standards might be imposed by the commission, and we don't know whether the industry can react to those standards positively and produce or not. So it makes it very difficult, and I was actually talking to Mr. Rosenthal's staff member because I was saying, is there any way to do that in the next couple of weeks before we send this on, to see if we can identify some standards that are acceptable to the industry, whether we're talking about a 5-year program or, well, actually we would only be talking about a 5-year program. And if we can find sort of a middle ground where we know the commission is going to be moving toward, that would not place the economics of this equation in jeopardy, I think that would be a better position. Secondly, the issue of financing, I don't know how the financing is going to be any better in 2 years. I just, if we're having problems identifying the financing now, I don't think it's going to be any easier to identify the financing in 2 years. Unless you're just saying, well, we're tipping you off, folks. You all have to come up with $20,000 to buy a new car, and then they get 2 years to save up or something. I don't know. I don't think they're going to be saving a whole lot of money in the next 2 years. They're barely making money, let alone to be able to save it. In fact, I go to a foreclosure. I go to a community meeting to give people information about foreclosure, and who do I see there? Taxi drivers. So it's not a laughing matter. But frankly, no matter how we do this, we have no description of the financing mechanisms available to these folks. And I wish we could have some ideas at least to kick around. We know that some of the larger companies are willing to roll the dice and take the risk that they can meet the standards. If the taxi commission imposes a 16% standard the first year, they believe that they can find 16% of their cars out there that can meet that standard, 21% the next year, et cetera, et cetera. And so who's bearing the risk under those circumstances if not those companies that are pushing it? So I would recommend that, I hate to say this, but I really think that it seems to me, based on my little poll, that, and colleagues help me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the council wants to push out the 5-year agreement. If that is the will of the council, then we ought to accept that and improve on their decision by honing in on better standards, honing in on some kind of ideas of where we're going to go with financing, creating some parallel activity that will generate the financing mechanisms that are necessary to make this work economically, rather than pit a hard line, pit the two sides in opposition on something that ain't going to happen. I believe this council is going to vote for a 5-year agreement. So my motion would be to hold off for 2 weeks with the specific purpose of trying to identify a parallel track for developing financing opportunities for this industry. Number two, that we hone in on what standards, environmental standards, the taxi commission might consider, or that we direct them to implement, so that we have a better understanding, and we work with those companies that are going to commit to improving the environmental opportunities. But to make a decision today, I think would merely punt the ball to the Taxi Cab Commission, and their standards could severely jeopardize many of the operators, and I don't think that's good for anybody.
Thank you very much, colleague, for your suggestion. Is there a second to this motion?
Second.
Second, wait. Hold on.
For the record. Well, for the record, go to the microphone. We're in a public.
What you're hearing right now is the city attorney came running over here to basically say what he was going to say now at the mic. What is it?
Does DOT have enough time to get this in and get it done before we need to publish this at the end of November? Do you have 2 weeks to prepare that type of thing?
I think it would be important for the department just to say a few words. We have not had any opportunity, I think, to speak, so I think it would be important to say a few words before.
What we'll do with, because the question has been asked, we'll just hold that for a second there, but the compellingness of what Mr. Alarcon is saying is he'd like to get it right, because if we're going to go 5 years, we'd like to get it right. So I think that's the thrust of where he's going. But before we deal with that, let's just hear from you a report. Two things I want to hear from you, okay? First is the customer comes first, and we all care about the customer, and we want to make sure that that is never lost. Secondly, the driver is the key player, obviously, in this. The driver's the one, be it owned and operated or whatever the story may be, and the big issue for the driver is a potential burden on them to go green. Who's going to pick up the burden, and how does it go? We've seen Seattle. We've seen San Francisco. We're hearing about the South Bay Consortium of cities working in a given direction. We've heard from Mr. Clark about some potential opportunities that could come from the federal government for greening, and that's as a backdrop. But now it's really your turn to bring us up to date as to where we are from last month's meeting, and again, where you think we need to go as a city. Please, Mr. Amir.
Thank you so much. Amir Sadati, Assistant General Manager, Department of Transportation. I'm joined here with Tom Drischler to my left, our taxi cab administrator and acting bureau head, and Janine Brands, our taxi genius. And I do echo some of the comments that the speakers made about we really do have the best staff, and I do want to give them all the credit because they put a lot of work into this. Let me start off by also thanking this committee for taking this opportunity for a second time to really get to the bottom of it. And also I want to thank all the people in the audience, all the drivers, everybody on both sides, all the stakeholders. It really does make the department come through and work even harder because we know that it matters to them. So I want to thank them. The first question you had asked was regarding the grant, and the department contacted the MTA grant coordinator, Mr. Diego Ramirez. And we have an email that does state if the franchise is less than 5 years, we would lose the $2.5 million. And when I say lose, there are other conditions where the department or the city would be on the hook. So if it's a 2 or 3 years and there are conditions that are not met, then the city has to have that money available. So we had asked additional questions from FTA. Unfortunately, we didn't get that prior to this meeting, but we went through the grant coordinator, as Mr. Clark mentioned, who manages the grant and has local rules and jurisdictions. On the question of the mayor's letter, we just received that a few minutes ago, as you did, and we obviously understand the mayor's point. It's unfortunate we did not have better communication prior to this. We just found out just a few days ago that there was a lot of disinterest, and we provided all the information we could. On the reduced scope study, what I'd like to share with you in the mayor's office is that for about a year, the department has worked with the taxi commission. There's been subcommittees of a greening. There is a lot of information that's been produced by DOT on other cities, what their greening components are. Nelson Nygaard, the prior consultant that had looked at the original study, has provided some preliminary information on that. So as far as best practices or that's what I think we as a city went through. We started in 2008. We put together the best scope, had all the input from all the stakeholders, and that took almost 16 months to get to that level. Then the consultant came in to do the study, and they needed 6 to 8 months to complete their study. So that was when I had 2 additional staff members. Through ERIP, I've lost those 2 staff members, so I'm down 2 people within the same bureau to do that work in an expedited fashion. So I just want to make sure we understand the expectation on the department, what our resources are. But I do concur with Mr. Frank that CDD, if they've got the money, we were not aware of the $100,000. We're not sure what it's exactly used for. I don't know if we can commingle those monies, but if CDD has the money, has been approved, we have no problem for them doing it. We'll even be happy if this council is willing to give our 126 to CDD to complete the study in a parallel path. But at this point, we really don't have information on that $100,000. What is it specifically can be used for?
Assuming you were to get that money, the parallel path is what you're saying.
Which was in our option too, which I'm going to get to.
Explain how the parallel plan would work.
I think that's where we are. From the last time we put together, I believe, 3 options before this body. I believe The president of the Taxi Commission provided yet another option, and then today we have a fourth or fifth option from the mayor's office. So in our report, in our three options that were before you, the best option that we thought made the most sense was option 2, where it is a 5-year renewal. Within that 5 years, you are going to green the fleets to a percentage that's going to be set. Within that same time frame, there will be a parallel path where either the 126 that we have can be used for workers' conditions, those social issues, or additional monies found to do a very comprehensive study of all the issues that's been brought up, that multi-transportation modes, taxis being green, I mean, whatever the other issues that was out there in the A to Z, in a parallel path. But as of today, we have 126,000 in DOT's account. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have enough information on the 100,000, what it specifically can be used, but that is administered by CDD. That CDD cannot just simply, I believe, give us the money and say, go do a study. So, and we're trying to, again, find out a little bit more information. So what you get in option 2 is the opportunity to green, and actually what's missing and what we're going to provide this body is a better explanation of what the greening means, what the standards are, what Mr. Frank was talking about as far as knowing what standards, emissions, how we will be greening the fleets, and how we will be enforce it. Because that's the other question this committee asked us, where is the teeth? What if these franchises decide not to green the taxi fleets, and you've given them a 5-year? So the other options were a 2 to 3 year renewal, but you would lose the grant for the wheelchair and you would not get the greening, but you would actually try to get a study if given monies were put into the place. So it kind of goes in line with what the mayor's program was, option 1, except the focus of the study has changed a little bit in the mayor's program as it was, I think, outlined in our program. Ours was looking more at the workers' conditions and drivers' welfare and health issues and things like that. And then the third option was just look, and also, I'm sorry, in option 1, it looks at different regulatory schemes. So if this body decided to do medallions or different types of schemes, then that study would have looked at that scope as one of its options to see what other regulatory schemes would be beneficial for Los Angeles. And then option 3 was, again, a two-year renewal, basically just to clean up the request for proposal that we had for the franchising and just do the franchising, but not do a study. Those were the 3 options that were outlined in the report, but as I mentioned now, there's a few other options before you. The greening is possible, and we feel that we've learned and worked hard within our staff looking at other cities, other lessons learned from lawsuits in New York and issues in San Francisco. It may not be the perfect plan, but I believe it's doable. I believe it's a small slice of us having the ability to green a industry that you really couldn't control. We regulate them, and you have an option right now to make Los Angeles green. And we'd like to run you through what that really means and then be able to answer some questions. And then I'd like to get to Mr. Alarcon's question at the very end.
Go for it. Janine.
Janine Brands of staff. Thank you for hearing us today. We can green now. The industry is ready to green now. All of our companies are willing to green now. One is pulling back a little bit, but they do have the ability, and they have greened in other cities. Around us in the nation, around us in other cities, they're going with hybrids in the South Bay, Torrance, 33 miles per gallon only. Long Beach, hybrid CNG vehicles. Seattle, San Francisco, we can do it as well. So let me explain a little bit about how the process would work under the franchising system. You do have to give them time to recoup their investment. That is very important, okay? They are going with used vehicles, Toyota Priuses, Ford Escape hybrids. Those are the most common. New York, Seattle, everywhere. That is the most common, and they are getting those vehicles used, just a couple years old, 40 to 50,000 miles for $15,000, $14,000 to $15,000, which is about $7,000 to $8,000 more than they pay for a used Crown Vic that was a police vehicle. But let's go into that in a moment. How it becomes a requirement in our franchise terms and conditions, it states that we are allowed by board resolution to mandate an increase in the clean fuel vehicle requirements. That's smog pollution, that's also greenhouse gas, and we're going for both. Not just one, we're going for both. Our vehicles now, the newest Crown Vics, are what we call low-emission vehicles. The next step up, and this is smog pollution, is ULEV, ultra-low-emission vehicles. That cuts it in half by the smog pollution. Then go up another notch, SULEV, super ultra-low-emission vehicles. That's what's available now. These mid-size Priuses, all the hybrids, they're SULEV emission for pollution. Okay, we also have used Nissan Altimas, Toyota Camrys that are not necessarily hybrids but are high mile per gallon, and it's getting better all the time. We would look to actually allow them to bring those in as green vehicles. You're cutting your greenhouse gases at least in half with these vehicles, and your smog pollution, we can go 70, in 5 years we can get our smog pollution decreased 77%. And almost cut in half our greenhouse gas emissions. And that is something wonderful. They're doing it everywhere else around us. We can do it here. We have a program that with a board resolution, and we're going to talk about the plan that we're going to recommend to them, and what they come back with, I guarantee you, will be very similar, and I know the industry is on board and knows that they can handle this type of a program. The board, by resolution, would set the standards. They would get input from your council. They would get input from the industry, they would get input from the drivers, they would get input from the Green Coalition in a few meetings, and have a tentative board order. With a replacement franchise ordinance, and that's how you renew it, it's a replacement ordinance, it would say, and here is the new greening program, just as we did it 10 years ago. Here is a resolution that has a greening program. To accept the replacement franchise, they have to sign a statement that they accept all the terms and conditions, so they would therefore know what they are, and that would be basically signing a contract, which is the franchise ordinance. That's how a franchise works. Then they're on board, they know what the greening requirements are. You'll all know what the greening requirements are, which are going to be very similar to what we've outlaid here, and I'll discuss that in a minute. So then what are the teeth? They know what they have to do each year. We have a plan that they'll have a little bit of a less percentage mandate in the first year, because each and every year you're getting more and more of these used hybrid vehicles out there in the market, and more of the used vehicles that are the high mile per gallon fuel efficiency and SULEV vehicles out there, and that's what we really want to go for. It's such an improvement. I'm very excited about this, if you could tell. How it will be enforced, in the franchise ordinance, section 2.2, our board has the right to provide monetary penalties, suspension of service from areas of the city, including the airport, or to make a recommendation to your city council to revoke that franchise if they don't meet the material terms and conditions of the franchise. Greening is a term and condition of the franchise that they will sign. We've done this before. If somebody was too late in getting their wheelchairs in the first year, or didn't quite come to the greening standard but were going there, they assess penalties. If somebody just doesn't green at all like they're supposed to, then they're going to kick them out. So they have all these teeth in the franchise that they get to use. We've done that many times. The basis of the greening program is that the wheelchair vehicle, accessible vehicles, and at least 20% of the rest of the fleet will not be the higher SULEV and high MPG vehicles, because we need minivans, we need the 7-passenger type vehicles for the large trips. We do need a certain amount of that. But these vans, I'm happy to say, are ULEV, which is not too bad, and they're getting a little bit more fuel efficient all the time. The remaining part of the fleet, which is 72 to 73% of the whole fleet, we want to green in 5 years. We have a plan that will start at 16% of that amount and then go to 21%. So as there's more and more of these vehicles available each year, it'll bring the cost down as they have to implement more of the vehicles.
What about a driver's concern about the ability to pay for it themselves?
Correct.
How would a driver deal with this over a 5-year period?
Here's an example. Most of the used Priuses that we're finding are 14 to 15,000. The Crown Vics are 7,000 that they buy. The vans are at least 10,000 or more. Okay, so there's about a 7,000 cost differential extra. They are going to, for the part of the leasing of the driver, okay, somebody owns it, somebody else is the driver that is the lease driver in many cases. Sometimes it's the same person. Typically, when you have a Toyota Prius, that person is saving $120 to $140 in the gasoline costs that they would normally pay as compared to a Crown Victoria per week. Half of that amount is going to go back to the owner as a surcharge on the lease. This is typical to what they do in Seattle, San Francisco, across the nation. Our companies have been typically doing about $10 per day, which is $60 to $70 per week, which is exactly half of that extra amount that the driver gets in the fuel economy. The other $60, $70 per week goes right in the driver's pocket. Thank you much for doing a hybrid have a nice day. That extra surcharge, which is part of the lease, goes to the owner of the vehicle to help them pay for that vehicle. So it pays for itself in about 2 years. You're going to have it for about 4 years. Now, you still have about $7,000 or $8,000 to come up with. We've talked to our companies. Most of the drivers have not needed any financial help to purchase these vehicles, but some of our companies have actually assisted them and had them pay them back in a year or so if they gave them a few thousand to help them over the hump to purchase it. Some at 0%, no interest, and some at low interest loans. So they are actually working as a company group, and this is per member fees to help finance that, which gets paid back. So in addition, we're looking for any of the monies that we can find. We'll take, even if it just goes 2 years, even if it goes 3 years, we couldn't mandate the green, but we would look to get any kind of funding possible to say, here it is, if you put it in, we really appreciate it. The other things that we're talking about...
In other words, on that point, just to be clear here, you're saying in a 5-year period, the process could work, but if Mr. Clark was able to add to it, it would be even more.
Hell yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear on it.
Yeah.
Mr. Alicon wants to speak, Mr. Koretz wants to speak, Mr. Labange, the vice chair, of course, wants to speak. But do we want to hear the rest of her presentation?
I think it was a good presentation. It was deep.
He's got a question at this point. Do you have a question
just,
at this point?
Just on this point, I think they could make the payments week to week, month to month, whatever it is, because the gas is an offset. But what about the ability to purchase the vehicle in the first place? How do they assert the credit worthiness? How do they come up with
most of our drivers have been able
payment?
to, most of our drivers have been able to get that funding or that credit worthiness to get those vehicles, and others have been helped by the companies. And it's not too many have asked for that help. Some have had waiting lists to get the vehicles. The companies have gone out and found some of the good priced used vehicles, and they have waiting lists of people waiting to purchase them. So according to our industry, it has not been much of a problem, but they have helped individuals over a short-term basis at either low interest or no interest assistance for the first year to get over that hump. So we're talking about less than 300 vehicles in the first year, and then it goes up to, I think, 358 or something every year thereafter. And they're going to be more available and even at a better price as time goes on.
So creditworthiness hasn't been a problem in other places?
No, they don't.
Purchase the vehicles initially without.
In San Francisco, for a while, they had a $2,000. If you bought a brand new vehicle, it wasn't the used. It's some of the CNGs. They've had different, same kind of Clean Cities Acts where they had $2,000 that ran out. But just the same thing as we've had AQMD money that has come and gone for different things to help them out. The point is, can they help them with the used vehicle cost, or will they get even a bigger amount for a new vehicle, because there is such a difference in the new vehicle price. A couple thousand on a new is really not going to cut it. We're talking basically they're going to go with used vehicles.
No, not at all, unless he's going to.
Which they have been.
Okay. No, you go.
So we just don't see the affordability issue for the driver as being a big problem. There are green taxis all over the world now, not just California, but nationally and internationally. All the taxi cab fleets all over the world are becoming greener. We are way behind the rest of the country and the rest of the world, and it's not an insurmountable issue anywhere else, really.
Well, wait a minute.
Go ahead, Richard.
I don't know. Maybe some of us are paying closer attention to the economy, but that statement is I think, is just ignoring the realities of our economy. The fact is we're going to be struggling for the next several years. This industry in particular is going to be struggling. So whatever other communities were able to do when the economy was good, we cannot compare that to what we have to do now that the economy is bad as we're trying to reignite this industry. One of the options that I think needs to go forward, no matter what we do, is a consideration of how we utilize our community development block grants in the future. We've developed loan programs for small businesses out of community development block grants, out of credit that we have with the federal government, or we can use CDBG directly to set up loan programs and even grant programs that we can design to incentivize service in areas that aren't getting service, incentivize some of the environmental features, and I think that we need to start talking about some of these things, because my fear is not the enforcement ability of the Department of Transportation. My fear is that many of these companies will fall out and we will not have service. That's my fear. And under the current economic conditions, some of the companies might be able to get through, but a lot of the independents won't, and that concerns me. So I would encourage whatever we do here, that we incorporate an investigation as to how we might utilize community development block grants, not necessarily this year, because Mr. Frank, as you know, we probably overspent in that category this year, but in future years, and certainly in the next 5 years, we can develop a loan program or a grant program for incentive purposes that would benefit and securitize, I should say, this industry, so that they can not only purchase clean vehicles, they can do it faster, and they can do it without fear of losing their business.
Okay, please.
And I forgot to mention, if it's a loan program, it's a revolving fund. So as they pay it back, more people can participate.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I just wanted to also go back to that last question that was on the table by Councilmember Alarcon on the 2 weeks. There's a lot of the standards already here provided. We've provided an attachment B with the program, as I think was one of the items that the council member asked, and I think the second was the funding. As mentioned here, both the mayor's office, the department, I mean, we are looking at AQMD. We're looking also at any other source to really help subsidize the drivers. I mean, I understand the study is important, and it looks like we have that study again in a parallel path, but if there are additional funding mechanisms, I just don't think the department has right now the ability or the time to come back in 2 weeks with any additional information that might help you. We are consistently looking at that, council member. We are doing that, but I just wanted to respond to the motion that you had for the additional 2 weeks.
With regard to the standards, the way that you structured them, you provided a variety of options. The standard is, I believe, 19% of the fleet in the first year?
16% of the 1,700.
So it's not based on the fuel consumption or the emissions. It's based on the percentage of the fleet. So theoretically, it could be all gasoline-powered Camrys.
Yeah, but they will unlikely...
That was a yes. I want to make that clear. You're saying that yes, that somebody can choose to buy all gas-fueled Camrys,
Yes.
and then the emissions would not be so great, would they?
No, it would still be, the SULA of the pollution, you'd still get all of the pollution reductions, and you wouldn't get as much of the greenhouse gas reductions.
As much as if you had a diverse fleet with hybrids and everything?
Again, the program has incentives. So if you are SULEV, if you are the cleaner, then you will get additional access to the airport and everything. So if you decide to invest in the Toyota Camry, yes, you fall into that category.
All I'm saying is I believe those standards can be tightened up. That's all I'm saying. You have a lot of information here, but I don't think there are enough incentives to move people away from the Camrys because you don't have enough slots at the airport to take care of everybody. So we're going to need more incentives.
And the reason they're going with the Priuses and the Escapes is because they get that extra fuel economy, and therefore they get to charge a higher lease rate to pay, which comes from the fuel economy in the Priuses. It pays for itself.
I used to drive a Prius, and going to the airport is a whole different thing, especially with luggage. Excuse me.
Which is why we still have to maintain the wheelchair and the 20% minivans.
Staff, you got more to say?
No, thank you. I think that just concluded our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions, but I just believe you still have, again, those options before you, and it's really, really important, as I think all of you understand, that a ordinance needs to be in place to be read so that come December 31, there will be some sort of regulatory scheme in Los Angeles for taxis. So backtracking that, we're still, I believe, our backs are against the wall as far as time, because this council now needs to weigh in, make the decision. City attorney has to be instructed to write the ordinances, come back. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and I think the most important thing is for this body or the council to make a decision.
Okay, let's go first to Mr. Park. No, Mr. Labange.
I was going to make a motion, but you have questions for?
Yeah, he has questions first. I'm going to hit the restroom real quick.
I will take over the meeting, and Mr. Rosenthal will be out of the room for a moment. Please, Mr. Koretz.
Yeah, there's one question that I heard brought up in a couple of contexts, not here in this meeting, about some of the hybrids. I've heard it said that Toyota and Honda have warned against using their hybrids for commercial taxi purposes, that there's questions about crash safety with some of them, that there's questions about adequate passenger and storage space for some of them. Have we looked at that issue, and how does that fit in with our approach to greening and what we're requiring of the taxi companies?
We haven't heard any recommendations not to use Toyota Priuses for taxi cab service or any safety issues. As far as the room in the Prius, we're getting really good results, that it is roomier than it looks when you sit in there. And basically with our Crown Vics, we had the shield partition, which the complaints we got, you couldn't stretch out your leg. If you were a tall person like Tom, you hit the shield. But now we're allowing safety cameras in lieu of the partitions, and with the safety camera in the smaller car, you increase the amount of passenger room back there. The Priuses do have amount of room in the back for the luggage, but when you're at the airport, if you're a big group with a lot of luggage, they're going to call a van for you, and they will be there.
Okay. Probably the biggest point for me, and we had this conversation offline, is the timing of all this, because I'm sympathetic and believe the need is there for all the things that the folks that want to just do this for 2 years are asking for. The labor issues, I think, are still somewhat of a he said, she said issue. I can't tell exactly how bad they are, but I think the problems clearly exist to some degree because people are complaining about them. On the other hand, I've talked to a lot of drivers that tell me the opposite, that things are fine. So I think we still need to delve deeper into that. I think there are a lot of other issues we clearly need to take care of. My question to you offline was, how long will it take to do all the best practices and all the things that we want to? Can we do this in a year and a half or 2 years? Give me an honest timeline, and maybe I'll just ask you that question publicly.
And I believe I already covered that, council member. If you'd like to repeat it, I will repeat myself as far as getting a study, getting a scope of work that going to now include different scopes that's presented in the mayor's office versus what the taxi commission had versus what the stakeholders had. Putting all of that into a package, advertising it, coming back and getting, approval of that by the taxi commission. And if the committee, like last time, wanted to weigh in, then we have to agendize that for committee and council. Bid the contract. Last time we had 3 vendors. I believe the 2 prior vendors have already mentioned they will not bid. I don't know if there's additional bidders out there, but this is a very unique type of work that there are not hundreds of consultants out there that could do this. From that time, you have to then award. Award has to go back to taxi commission, back to council. Then you have to start the work. Typically, this work does not take 3 months to do. I mean, if this is all of the things that's been put in, as you mentioned, all of that does take longer than 18 months. We believe it's somewhere between 2 to 3 months, 2 to 3 years, given the current resources the department has. And right now, we only have 126,000, and the city attorney has advised us that you cannot release an RFP unless you have the funds in your account. You cannot say, I'm going to release an RFP hoping to get other funds. So we wouldn't even be able to release that until funds have been transferred again into DOT account, or vice versa. If DOT is giving the money to CDD, then the CDD must have their own rules. But on behalf of DOT, sir, this would take at least 2 years, if not longer, 3, to actually get to a solution, to get to you what a regulatory scheme would work, what are the best practices, what would be the best types of health care and other issues for drivers.
And I think we'd probably want to include everything that was discussed, including some study of how cabs better fit into our transit system. I mean, from an environmental standpoint, I think it would be amiss not to include that issue as well, which I suspect would add some time. I don't disagree with the concerns that the folks have that have asked for us to do this in 2 years, but it strikes me that Councilmember Alarcon's proposal may be the best one, in that we try to do all the things that we really need to do, but we give it a realistic timeline, and on a parallel track we're greening our cabs, and we have that 5-year period running. And at some time near the end of that 5 years, I should have identified all of our best practices and have them ready to go at that time. I suspect if we gave it a tighter timetable, we probably wouldn't meet that timetable, and we wouldn't have 5 years of a green fleet. So, not disagreeing with any of the concerns that were expressed, but in fact wanting to make sure we cover all of them, I'm still now inclined to go with the 5-year proposal as outlined by Councilmember Alarcon.
Okay, Mr. Chair, could I?
Please, Mr.
Yeah,
Vice
okay,
Chair,
I've
Mr.
reviewed
LaBonge.
everything, read everything, and I believe the department, and understanding the department and the critical time we're in, it's best for the city and its partnership with those that we go for the 5-year plan. So I want to move the 5-year plan. But also I want to ask Mr. Parks his review of anything. And what happens if we do it before 5 years? You know, what happens if they got to Los Angeles in 1780 and 1781? It would be 1 year earlier. So you can't achieve it earlier, achieve it earlier, but if you can't, get you 5 years.
Do we have a second for that motion?
Yeah, 1781.
Do we have a second for Mr. LaBonge's motion?
I'm not sure I fully understood what he was getting
The motion was for 5 years.
Yes, and I have several other things I'd like to add
And
to
Mr.
it.
Parks seconded it. Mr. Parks, you have some more questions.
Yeah, I support that we have recommend that we have a 5-year extension that would include the greening of the cabs that would become effective prior to the extension of the current franchises at 12/31/210, that the cost of the greening be borne by the franchises and our operators, that also that the LADOT be requested to seek the funding for the study with all of the parameters that have been discussed from the franchisees, so that the city is not expending any general fund monies or block grant money to fund the study. The study should be of most importance to the franchisees, and we should ask them equally to share in the cost of that. Also, that the greening extension, we need to ensure that the standards for greening are clearly defined, that there be escalating emission standards included. That's all part of the extension of the contract. That this should be a part of the approval of the extension, and that we should ask the Taxi Commission to take on the responsibility to coordinate with the mayor's office to be the focal point of identifying funding for conversion, either internally or externally within the city, to assist this 5-year extension to go forward, and that we ask the city attorney to complete the necessary ordinances to get this done prior to December 31st. And finally, that we ask the CLA to identify whether the city has taken a position on HR 3711 or Senate Bill 1741, and if we have not taken a position, that we complete a resolution to support those two pieces of legislation.
I'd like to ask, just for a follow-up to that motion, which I second, the city attorney to answer any of that.
Yes, Councilmember Parks, under the current terms and conditions of the franchise ordinances, we cannot ask the franchises to pick up the cost of that.
We can't demand it.
It would be a change in material terms to ask them to do that.
We can ask them to voluntarily do it.
The city attorney would advise against that from a litigation standpoint. One of the reasons that the previous study you actually suspended or dismissed was because of the appearance of bias.
No, I was there. The reason that the issue was resolved and it was dismissed was a dispute as to whether the RFP came to council as directed, as opposed to being submitted by LADOT. That was the issue of why it was discontinued. And the reason it was not at council is that the department could not get it before this committee to get it approved. And so, again, the issue is that We have in the contract, we've made changes in the emission standards as part of the contract. All I'm saying is that this is an important issue for the franchises to get a 5-year extension. It's important for the city to get the green cabs, but it's also important in these financial times that the city seek revenue for the funding and not be piecing together revenue that could pay for an additional traffic officer or someone else. So I understand what you're saying.
Mr. Parks asked a question there on this here. If the city attorney could research those and before it comes to council, if there's some technical reason that stops us.
And again, we have every right to listen to your advice, and we have every right to ignore your advice.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, on that point, I just want to make sure staff understood what Mr. Parks was saying. He added amendments to the original motion, which was the 5 years. Amir?
We understood, and we'll get a copy from the clerk. Thank you. But we heard and we understand.
Okay. And can you get that for us before it comes to council?
Yes.
One point of clarification.
Yeah, sure.
One thing I wasn't clear on with
Clarification
the motions that have just been made, and if it was not included, I'd like to ask that we include that all of the best practices that we discussed would be moved forward on a parallel track during those 5 years.
But I think those best practices we hope would be in the study.
Well, but that after the study is completed, we actually implement them also.
Oh, no, we have to do that. I mean, but the key is, if they're collected in the study, then it's a matter of implementing the study.
And I'm not sure that the study covered all the best practices, including from a transportation level, how taxi cabs can better fit into our transit system. I think ideally, every one of those steps needs to be dealt with during this 5-year period. So when it's over, we're ready to go with a relatively perfect system.
But I think all of us is going to have an opportunity to help craft the study. And so that's where I hope we get all those points in, so when they complete the study, then we've not left anything out, and we also would have the funding for the study that we would have to search for, and then we'd have the implementation.
Right, and the object would be that if we move forward with this as a council and as a city, that you have regular report backs on how we're doing, not only on the greening, but these other issues that we're talking about, so that the parallel study can have clarity coming from the committee and the council on an ongoing basis, so it isn't a last minute, again, thrown at us.
Understood, council member, and previously, right. I think it's in your package, we provide very extensive report cards on all companies. We do this routinely with the board. We're happy to provide quarterly update to the Transportation Committee on all of our...
Yeah, we would like quarterly updates to keep us in the loop. And Janine, as you go before the Taxi Commission with the constantly bringing up the strategy of how you're going to be greening and with the penalties and all that, that you give us a report back on that on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis as well. But we're now joined by Rita Robertson, the great Rita Robertson, who is now before us. Rita?
Hi, good afternoon. This may be one of my last times for me to be able to address the T Committee. So I thank you for the opportunity and also for your patience in working with the staff and us in trying to craft something that we think will be better for the city. In light of the things that you're trying to accomplish with regard to moving forward with the 5 years, the greening and the standards you want for the greening and the funding that you want to assist the taxi drivers, I would recommend, because of the situation with staffing on a lot of ends, is that since the mayor's office was successful in getting additional money for the study from CDD, that the motion also includes CDD be directed to perform the study, and if you want us to transfer our money that we have available to CDD, we can do that, because DOT will not be able to utilize the money that was granted by CDD in order to perform the study, and doesn't have the resources to fund it, and also may be seen as tainted in order to do the study. So we would direct CDD to do the study with the $100,000 that they already have authorized through the mayor's office, and also with the $126,000 I think we have left in DOT, so that money could be transferred. And then they could be directed to report to the Taxi Commission regarding the scope of work and those statuses on the grant itself and on the actual study itself. That way you have a clean slate process.
Hearing that, Mr. Frank, can you work that into the proposal so that we do have that money to go forward in a parallel way?
The money is there. I think the question is who's best to do the procurement. And so CDD is a backdrop. I think it's a second best because, quite honestly, I think DOT, if it is going to inform a regulatory scheme, it really should be best, managed by DOT if it's going to inform their decision making. But I think we should bring that conversation back to maybe to the committee in the future, and let's think about it a little bit.
That's a good point. And Mr. Clark, it's very important to me that you report back to us on your findings with the administration, with SCAG, with others. When can you report back and give us some more comfort level? Obviously, by the end of the year, we should know if we would even be eligible for a grant. Is that right?
Correct. That would be correct. My understanding is that the notice of funding availability should come out before the end of the year.
Yeah, and with that as a backdrop, just assume my colleagues and I in the city go forward with this. Right. This would be a lot more aggressively compelling to you, to Washington, to get that kind of support for our 2,300 cabs.
If the committee's meeting in, say, 2 weeks, I think I could have a more detailed report for you in 2 weeks.
You could. Okay, we've had a lot of discussion here. Mr. Alarcon, you want to add anything at this point to Mr. Labange's motion as clarified by Mr. Parks and Mr. Koretz? Okay. Mr. Alarcon said he may introduce a motion on the floor when this comes before the full council for action. Is there any other colleague who want to make any other comment at this point?
I'm ready to go.
Comment after the vote. After the vote, he wants to make a comment. Okay. Oh, Richard.
You can identify.
No, they didn't give me any keys. That was a good thing.
That was a sort of an in-family joke.
Giving it up.
Yeah, okay. All right, we have a motion on the floor, and we have a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? It's unanimously supported by the council. When will this go before the full council? Mr. Clark, when will this go before the full council?
Sergeant, ask him if he's going to just...
When will this go before the full council?
Hold on, everybody, hold on. Hold on.
Please.
With the committee's okay next Wednesday?
What?
The 20th? October 20th, if you're okay.
October 20th. Okay, this will go before the full city council on October the 20th. Okay. If there's any other business to be discussed at this point.
I just wanted to
Mr. Labange.
I don't know if we could all hold the tension for a moment, please. Hold the tension, if I would, please, in this chambers. In the John Farrell chambers, we just spent almost 3 hours here.
Can we continue that last item?
This was an item that we discussed today, but I think historically in the world, the tremendous activities of the rescue in Chile, there's only 4 more workers that have to come out. Let's think about Chile today and their work. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
One other technical housekeeping item. The last item, we will continue to the next committee meeting, as Mr. Parks was suggesting. With that in mind, this meeting of the Transportation Committee is now adjourned. Thank you.